Story 1. A house where I usually slept and ate with family members felt like home. It included the whole neighborhood and the other houses where I was also welcomed. It was a safe time and place, and I roamed around freely. Story 2. There was always music, whether from a record player, compact disc player, or someone practicing their instrument. Story 3. My dad is building a deck and then waiting a decade to build the stairs for it. I think he just didn't know how to cut the stringers. Story 4. The house had a secret room behind an upstairs closet. It was the ceiling of the staircase below, spiraling up until it met the flat roof. It had a window and we would hang out there sometimes. Story 5. The house had a crawl space that frightened me. I dreamed that a body was buried there, and decades later I occasionally have that same dream. I blame my oldest sister, who claims to have seen a ghost in the house. Story 6. The sounds of cicadas buzzing in the trees and the sight of their recently shed skin still clinging to the tree trunk. Story 7. All the levels include the attic, upstairs bedrooms and bathrooms, living room, ground level den, kitchen, dining room, screened porch, and finally the basement. No wonder I wore out a knee. Story 8. My mom was and still is a ridiculously ambitious gardener. She had so many orchids that she donated some to the Smithsonian Arboretum. When I was very young, she planted a little palm tree in the backyard, down by the lake. It was a gift from Dorothy Shula, the wife of Don Shula. She planted it right next to the seawall. Well, palm trees root down, not out. That tree rooted directly into the lake. It grew like a missile. When the freeze hit in the late 1980s, it grew out for a few years instead of up. It took 3 people to hug the base of it. After the freeze, it kept growing upwards. When the fronds fell, they hit the ground like anvils. It was and still is the healthiest palm tree I've ever known. We don't live there anymore, but you can still see it from the front yard. The root is nearly 10 feet below the foundation of the house, going downhill to the lake. I love that palm tree. Story 9. It was a money pit with aluminum wiring, rodents, and unsafe plumbing. I am fortunate the place did not harm me. Story 10. My dad paid me $20 to paint the entire deck when I was about 11. Needless to say, I painted myself into a corner, and he laughed about that for months. Story 11. My dad took his life in the large bedroom, and outside you could see where they patched the roof. My childhood was not easy. Story 12. The front door, which my mother insisted should always be kept locked, presented a challenge for my younger brother. He would often try to avoid the long walk around to the back door. One day, I was sitting in the front room reading when the doorbell rang. Without looking up from my book, I yelled, "Go around to the back." After a moment, the doorbell rang again. I repeated, "Go around to the back." Still not looking up, and from another room, my mother called out, "And wipe your feet." When the bell rang for a third time, I turned in my seat, my expression furious, to find a very confused looking paperboy waiting for someone to open the door and pay him. Story 13. I had the entire basement to myself at one point, where I could live freely. Unfortunately, I had to change houses after a year or two. Story 14. The big pillars on the front porch and the giant hydrangea bushes perfectly framed the entrance. After we left that house, I would go on field trips, and the school bus would always drive by when headed that direction. I quickly learned to sit on the passenger side of the bus so I could see that house. Story 15. Not having doors on the bedrooms left no space for them to swing. We had drapes for privacy. There was no heat in the bedrooms. We only had 2 radiators, one in the living room and one in the dining room. The square footage was under 700 square feet. We were a family of 5, and it seemed normal to feel so cramped. Story 16. The previous owners said there was a ghost of an old woman in a white nightgown that you would see in the middle of the night. I saw her standing in our kitchen one night. I never told my older cousin, but he stopped sleeping upstairs. I never found out why, but in my 30s, my mother told me it was because he woke up and saw an old woman standing next to the bed. Years later, my mom reminisced and talked to the newest owners who bought the house, and they told her it was haunted. I was terrified to go to sleep the whole time we lived there. Story 17. The creaky stairs to the second floor required knowing the exact location of the creaky part on each stair. This knowledge allowed for silent sneaking in late at night. Story 18. A larger lot next to a stormwater drainage pond with bluegills and small goldfish that neighbors released into the wild. We would ice skate on it in the winter. In the summer, we had a small raft to row about. The backyard had sedum and wildflowers such as trillium, jack-in-the-pulpit, May apples, spring beauties, and mosses. I would feed the birds and lay on the ground watching the plants grow. Story 19. We had to crawl to the basement during drive-by shootings. The landlord was involved in questionable activities and lived above us. Story 20. The hole my father cut in the linen closet floor was called a laundry chute. The truth was it just fell to the basement floor, about 50 feet away from the washer. Story 21. The best tasting water came from the upstairs bathroom sink tap. The crawl space under the basement stairs was my favorite place. Story 22. Smoking cigarettes on the roof and sneaking in and out through the basement window. We had squeaky doors. Story 23. I swear that it was haunted. I heard, saw, and sensed many things in that house, and so did a lot of other people. Story 24. It was a dome, so you had to be creative about decor for the angled walls. For my grandparents' house, which I considered more of a home, the smell of coal oil, the sound of the train at night, and the orange daylilies and mock orange in the yard created a special ambience. Story 25. The third bedroom always had an ominous vibe. All of us kids shared one room because nobody wanted to sleep in there. I later found out that one of my siblings had tried sleeping in there once and woke up to what they described as the devil standing in the room. They screamed and never slept in there again. Story 26. There was a secret door in the cupboard on the landing upstairs that led to the back of a bedroom closet. Our house was spacious, warm, and loving, though a bit worn. But if anyone cared, they did not show it. Story 27. In the third grade, in the mid-1980s, we moved into an old farmhouse built in the 1920s. The finished basement had plaster and lath walls and green patterned carpet. There was a lacquer-topped bar with cutout centerfolds glued to the bar top and then lacquered over. About 6 years later, my mom decided to paint over it. Story 28. The extraordinary parenting of my mom and dad involved 8 kids, all participating in sports. We created so many wonderful memories. Story 29. I remember the sounds of rain hitting the tin roof, the whistle and rhythmic wheels of the train on the nearby track, and sometimes a deep resonant horn from a large boat on the Mississippi River that was a couple of miles from my house. The songs of crickets were the lullabies of my childhood. Story 30. The sound of tree frogs singing during summer nights. I grew up in the 1980s and 1990s in New Hampshire. For anyone else who is reading this and shares memories of that time and place, watch the 2023 movie Janet Planet, set in 1990s Western Massachusetts. It truly captures the essence of a pre-internet childhood in small-town New England. Story 31. My dad and grandpa built it, and there was a strange area in the basement that always had slugs. My room had no heat or insulation. I loved that house. Story 32. Winter storms knocked the power out. We all hunkered down in the basement recreation room, where the fireplace was, and waited it out, playing board games and reading, feeling warm and cozy. Story 33. There was no running water or indoor plumbing. It was hot in the summer and very cold in the winter. I was glad to leave it at age 17. Story 34. It had one bathroom, and I lived with my single mother and 2 older sisters. I frequently used the backyard. Story 35. 2 adults, for children, 3 bedrooms, and 1 bathroom. I guess largely because of that, most of my childhood memories involve playing outdoors. The house itself was just a place to live for me. Story 36. It smelled very particular. Arriving home, especially during warm months, from vacations, summer camp, or visits to grandmother's, the scent would be olfactorily noticeable again for a few minutes at least before one's nose got used to it. It is a kit house built in the 1910s, and by the time we moved in, it had already seen 60 years of people living in it. It smelled like wood and mildew, the kind that comes from old books and attics, not oppressive mildew, cooking, and wood fires in the former wood-burning kitchen stove before our time, but seen in photos of the then-new kitchen in the 1950s and the fireplace. It had a unique house scent. A few years ago, my husband left and took the sofa with him. Good riddance to both. My mom had been encouraging me to take one of her sofas, and this was the perfect time. I loved the one she wanted to get rid of. It's a large, heavy 9-foot-long Art Deco piece with deep cushions. Stupidly comfortable. When she had it reupholstered in 1991, I chose the fabric, tasteful black and gray stripes. I brought it home and set it up, and it made the room look great. I sat on it and was transported to years of sitting on that couch, alone with family, with friends, napping during Christmas and muggy Julys when it was too hot to sleep upstairs. Thousands of hours of cable television and VHS tapes watched seated on it. It was pure comfort furniture, an aesthetically pleasing anchor during a turbulent time in my life. Much to my delight, soon after I brought it home, I took off for a 3-day motorcycle camping trip with friends. I returned weary and relaxed, nearly midnight and humid, and when I walked into my apartment, I was hit by the smell of coming home from a vacation. The pleasantly musty house scent of my childhood home wafted through my bachelor pad. Scents and memories form deep emotional connections in your brain, indelibly linked. In this situation, it reminded me of coming home as a teenager, probably altered, to find my mom out for the weekend, the house to myself. Sure, visiting my mom always brought that arriving home feeling, but now it interestingly felt out of context. My nest, my space, yet there was a little nod to a very deep, comforting sense of home. That smell came from my emotional support anchor sofa. It was a fascinating case of an object from one time and place inserting itself into my current time and place in its own little pocket of air. I flopped down on it, dropping my helmet and leathers, pulling off my boots, and sinking into its tastefully retro embrace. I felt at home. It felt nice. Smelled nice. We were never permitted to eat or drink on that sofa, especially after the reupholstering. To do so was punishable by death. I leaned forward and took a pre-roll from a box on the coffee table, then leaned back to light it, enjoying how annoyed my mom would be that I was smoking on the couch. Story 37. The basement. I was frozen in fear when my mother asked me to go down there for something. It was dark and totally frightening. She found me in the hallway near the door in tears, not wanting to disobey, but unable to conquer my fears. I was only about 6 or 7. She didn't make me go down there. Story 38. They built the house so a woman with paranoia was closer to a psychiatric hospital. There are safes hidden all over the house, including false outlets and removable baseboards. We never found anything interesting, though. The outlet in my bedroom had some old cigarettes, and that's it. Story 39. It was a beautiful house with acres of land and a huge backyard. I remember all of the significant moments, like my dad and the neighbors building the back porch, then the swing set, and finally the pool. We had apple and peach trees lining the driveway. There was a wicker house in the backyard with grapevines. We would hang around and pick the fruit. We ran in the woods, discovering streams and piles of rocks to climb on. We captured geckos and frogs. The dogs followed us as my parents bred them. It was a lovely house, but my parents struggled with alcoholism and often fought. I also remember my brothers and I running to the neighbor's house to hide, police visits, bruises, losing the house, foster care, and jail visits. Truly was a beautiful house. Story 40. 8 people, 1 bathroom. Is that an issue for you? You know where the outhouse is? Yes, even in the harsh Midwestern winters of the late 1970s. Fortunately, we had a shower in a building just outside the back door of the house, not the back door of the outhouse. What, did you have an outhouse with a back door? The shower was serviceable and even preferable during the warmer months since there was no air conditioning in our house. Story 41. My home was never my house. It was school and the people in it. I disliked school, but it was worth attending just to see those people. They were my family, not the one I had in that house. Story 42. My dad built it himself. He repurposed various items from the construction sites he supervised. The pole from which our basketball hoop was hung was actually a 6-inch piece of steel conduit that had been cut incorrectly and had a 90-degree bend placed on it. The light illuminating our patio came from a school parking lot. It had been damaged, so he cut it down to fit our needs. We also had a drinking fountain from another school that had been delivered defective, but with his repair, it found a place in our basement next to a full-size blackboard with outdated school maps. Story 43. The sting of the floor on my cold feet when I jumped down from the counter with my box of cereal before anyone else was awake. Story 44. There was a hammock under a mulberry tree, and I loved the dappled sunlight. There weren't many trees with real leaves in the desert. We often had an abundance of tomatoes in the summer. My dad played Beethoven on the piano in the middle of the night, and I would sneak out to watch him. I remember the noise the swamp cooler made as I stared at the popcorn ceiling, calmed by the rattling. Story 45. My eccentric mother had glass sliding doors installed to divide the kitchen and family room to keep cooking smells out of the rest of the house. After everyone, including the dog, kept bumping into the glass, she put flowered contact paper along the bottom 1/3 of the glass. Story 46. The house was a rambler located at the bottom of a steep hill and flooded during heavy rain. I grew up near South Seattle and we lived under the airport flight path. Story 47. Playing among the pile of asbestos sheets during renovations. Good times. Story 48. Rhubarb patch, cherry tree, apple tree. We had great pies, roasting marshmallows in the fireplace, and a big stained glass window at the bottom of the stairway. The big magnolia tree. So many things. Our big old house was just beautiful. Mom decorated with class and style. Story 49. A few things come to mind, but one stands out. There was a bar set up in our basement that was never used. I remember finding a small cigar box. When I opened it, I found a rock that appeared to have blood on it, sitting on some tissue paper. I got scared, either dropped it or put it back, and ran away. I have no idea if it meant something to my parents, but I don't believe anything else happened afterward. I avoided that part of the basement from then on. Story 50. I found a toy car in one of the closets when we first moved in. I was 7 and remember thinking the house had something for me, which made it feel a little less scary and new after that. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.